Thank you all for waiting the extra week. If you follow my Twitter, you'll know that I went and I visited family out here in North Carolina, and that's why I didn't post last week. So I apologize for not posting. I could have prepared something, but I just didn't. And also, I'd like to apologize if this video is a bit weird. Normally, little secret, I write a script for all of my videos. And it's just like a rough layout and a rough roadmap of how the video is supposed to go, with transitions and topics, intros, conclusions, where I plug to subscribe to the channel, which you should do right now. But today I don't have one. Partially, there's two reasons for that. One of them is because I just didn't write a script. I was kind of lazy this week. And the second is why I was lazy this week. Fortnite has been keeping me busy, to say the least. I worked a lot, not overtime really. I worked a few hours overtime, not a lot, but it was just a lot of work that I had to do. So I didn't write a script. But today's video, I hope, is a little bit interesting because I want to talk about single player and multiplayer games. And some people might be saying, what do you want to talk about them? I think people have this idea about single player games that is fundamentally incorrect about single player games, and I'll go into detail about that here in a minute. But I also want to explain why I think the industry for some time has kind of strayed away from single player games and focused more on multiplayer games. And we'll start that with talking about the publisher that everybody loves to hate, EA. As one of, if not the biggest publisher, EA has had a hand in a lot of different projects over the years. Of course, their single-player titles range into BioWare territory with the Mass Effect trilogy, the Dragon Age, what is it, a saga at this point, I think, and then Anthem, which we know how that turned out, and then in their multiplayer franchises, which Battlefield, Apex Legends, so they have their hands in both pots. That's why I want to talk about these guys. I think that they've had a mentality switch in recent years, and there's one game that I think really did it for them. Let's talk about BioWare first, though. BioWare has had massive success with RPGs, with Mass Effect being their most prominent series, and then Dragon Age is behind it. And then, of course, they have something in the multiplayer side with Star Wars The Old Republic. Now, Star Wars The Old Republic is a game that wasn't really developed by BioWare prior. It was BioWare Prime, BioWare, their A team. It was developed by a different team, and that different team led the charge on SWTOR. Now, that's what happened with Anthem, except that team didn't really have a lot of input in Anthem, hence why the game turned out the way it was. Plus, there was a bunch of other fuck-ups within BioWare structure and on EA's side, but I'm not here to talk about that. If you guys want to know more about that, and also Andromeda, which had similar issues, there's two videos that you can watch by YouTuber named Reykjavik, I don't know how you pronounce his name. I'll link his channel in the description if you guys are interested. They're longer videos, but all of his videos talk about pre-production stuff all the way up to launch and post-release support. It's a great channel, and I highly recommend you give it at least a watch on the games that you enjoy. So, there we go. Now, turning back to EA on this side, because BioWare was doing so well with single-player games and they had multiplayer success, they wanted to make Anthem one of their biggest games, and Destiny they knew was making success. So they wanted to, take Destiny and kind of make their own twist on it. And Anthem, for all intents and purposes, kind of was Destiny, but it had potential. People wanted to see what Anthem could do, but then it came out and the gameplay was monotonous, the end game didn't exist, and the story was bland. So that was not nice. But the game itself was pretty anticipated. So everything was going kind of well for them, and then it all fell apart. After Anthem, that was kind of the last straw for BioWare. They didn't, or for EA, I mean. They didn't really want to do single-player games for a while because they weren't making a lot of money. They were getting a lot of backlash for it, and if your company's getting backlash, you're not going to make a lot of money. That's just how it works. So they started focusing more on multiplayer stuff, and that's when Apex Legends started getting a lot of traction, and then, of course, they started releasing content more for Battlefield 5, and then Star Wars Battlefront 2 came out, and Star Wars Battlefront 2 had a lot of post-release content. Now they're kind of done with it, but it had a lot of content added and a lot of changes to it that made it a better game than what it was on launch. So they were dealing with that. And then EA kind of proved themselves wrong with single-player games, and that was with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, another Star Wars game. Jedi Fallen Order is a Star Wars game that's set in between the sequels and the prequels. Follows Cal Kestis, and I'm not going to explain too much of the story in case you haven't seen it, because it's a great game and I recommend you play it. I will go over a little bit of the gameplay and themes right here. So the gameplay and the thematic style of the game is similar to Dark Souls, and I hate saying that, and I know other people hate saying that too, but Souls-like is a genre. So this game is similar in that sense, where you have a bonfire system, you have hard combat that requires mechanical expertise, and then you have a level up system that requires certain perk points, and you have health that is consumable that refills on resting at your bonfire system. That's the basis of it. The difference there is that Fallen Order takes it to multiple different planets, multiple different environments, a lot of different enemies that require different things. There's ranged attacks that you can deflect. And of course the boss battles are different, but there's a lot of things that are different between the two games, but it falls into what we call a Souls-like game. And this game did so well that EA was kind of forced to acknowledge that single-player games could turn a profit. And there were other games that supported this that came out before then. My biggest example for that is Witcher 3, one of the biggest games that I've ever played, sunk at least 200 hours into it. Its DLC is the size of Witcher 1 and 2, not combined, but individually, their DLCs are massive. And it's just, the game is so big, and it garnered a lot of sales, even from people who hadn't played the other games. That was me. I started with Witcher 3, went back and played the other games. Because that happened, Cyberpunk 2077, CD Projekt Red's next title, has so much hype garnered around it that even if it's a mediocre game, it's going to be heralded as a great one because people love CD Projekt Red. That's how this stuff works. That's why BioWare kind of got a little bit of leniency on Andromeda, because people thought that EA was the issue, and then Anthem came out and it was just a nail in the coffin for that one. But single player games can make things, they can make money, they can turn heads, they can do all these things, and EA is now forced to acknowledge that, which is good. And here's where I think that people, as well as studio executives, and I think people in general, there's some generalization of the gaming community, have a distinct, fundamentally wrong opinion about how single-player games and multiplayer games are different. So multiplayer games are meant for instant gratification through gameplay loops. Think Call of Duty Warzone, think Apex Legends, even Fortnite. It's pretty easy. You jump into a game, you drop down into the map, you pick up weapons, and you just kill people, and then at the very end you get this big message that says that you win, right? And that's with other multiplayer games as well. The original Call of Duty's deathmatch, you just fight until the number hits a certain point, and then you get a big message that says victory. These games are instant gratification through a sense of you doing well during a high stress or a high action environment. Single player games are meant they give satisfaction through telling a story. They're a narrative experience. And the issue with the games industry is that they have this mantra called gameplay is king. And in a single player game, gameplay needs to be interesting, but if your story isn't interesting, then your gameplay doesn't really matter. There are a few games that I can think of that have this problem, where the story just isn't good, so it doesn't matter if the gameplay is great. I'll link a video on something like that down below, and also the next video I'm going to talk more in depth about that mantra, and also a concept in the games industry called ludonarrative dissonance, with I think it's an overused thing, but it exists. But we'll talk about that next week. So single player games are not being viewed in the same way as multiplayer games because they're not garnering, the amount of sales or money that other games might, depending on the title, obviously. But generally, multiplayer games will sell more because more people want to play with their friends. And multiplayer games are great. Without a multiplayer game, we wouldn't have a competitive esports scene, we wouldn't have an FGC scene, we wouldn't have Smash Bros, we wouldn't have anything like that. So multiplayer games are necessary for the gaming environment, but single player games are also necessary, because single-player games provide an experience that multiplayer games cannot. They're two sides of the same coin, and you shouldn't be flipping the coin to determine what your game is. That's what Anthem was. What Anthem should have done was pick a side of the coin that looked best and then slap that onto the table. But studios kind of like to flip the coin and see if they can get it landed right on the side of the coin. But you can't do that. Not very well. Few games can do that to an extent that's actually worth it. That can tell a story, build a world, and also be online and have multiplayer experiences. MMOs are like the biggest contributor to that. But you have to have a pre-established world. World of Warcraft had a pre-established world. Elder Scrolls had an entire universe planned out before they actually went and made Elder Scrolls Online. You require some building before you can do that type of thing. And Destiny didn't do it, but Destiny did well because the gameplay was great and Bungie was phenomenal at their development. And they put time into their lore, they just put it in the wrong area. Anthem did not. But the opinion or the thought process that leads to games, single-player games, being treated the same as multiplayer games, where the gameplay needs to be the best thing, is not what should be happening here. I personally believe that the gameplay is king mantra should apply to multiplayer games, and there should be another mantra that reflects a narrative story, because what really sucks, and what you can look up and what you can find, is that writers of games typically get these game documents. They get these mechanics that are going to be put into the game, or they write these elaborate stories, and then parts of them get cut out because the game can't be designed around them. And that's normally due to a time constraint, or because the levels that are already made don't fit the story, so they have to rewrite it. And that's not what should be happening. There's a few scripted games that kind of go like this, Uncharted, Infamous, and games like that, where they have a set series of events that happen, and some of them are weaker than others. That's typically because gameplay had to be designed around a certain thing, or the story had to be designed around a certain thing, and because of that it feels kind of forced. So I'm hoping that in the future, and I hope that due to EA's success with Jedi Fallen Order, studios start to drop this gameplay is king thing and start looking more towards the narrative side of things as a better way to do things, because single player games are interactive movies. The difference between a game and a movie is that a game the player has control over. A movie, you're just along for the ride. So I hope that means that in the future that the multiplayer side of things will not die down, but it'll pump out games that are of good quality, and I hope that single player games elevate it to the next level. They take things farther, they push these incredible stories with these great characters and these beautiful worlds with a ton of lore to explore, i.e., I'm going to harp on this more, Witcher 3 did all of this so well, and that's why it was so successful. I hope I'm not I'm not stepping on people's toes by saying this. I know that a lot of people love single player and multiplayer games, but, it has to be said that as we move more towards, as studios want to make more profits, they move towards multiplayer games that have this free-to-play aspect where it's software as a service, where you can buy cosmetics or something like that, and that's how you make your money. I hope that mentality changes soon. I think Nintendo is one of the biggest ways that we can do this. Xenoblade Definitive Edition, JRPGs are also massive. We've seen Final Fantasy VII have massive success, and I'm assuming the other parts will have just as equal a success. Cyberpunk 2077 will have huge success because of what I mentioned earlier in the video. I hope that these titles push people towards single-player games, and I hope that we see more single-player games, because these incredible stories that people have to tell simply can't be told in a battle royale. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I recommend you subscribe so you can keep up with all my content. I try and post weeklies. Monday at noon is when I normally release them. Albeit next week, I'm not going to have one because I'm working on a Saturday, and I record these on Saturdays. So I will not be recording for next week, which kind of sucks, but hey, it is what it is. If you guys want to keep up with me on social media, you guys can do that at Kyogre. I'll list a tag right here. And I hope to see you guys next week when we talk about gameplay mantras like gameplay is king in terms like ludonarrative dissonance. I'll see you all then.